I'm Neeti Upadhye, and welcome to an ATV Special Broadcast. The Honorable Robert Wexler is an outspoken advocate for the alliance between the United States and Israel. Wexler's passion to bring an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict has driven both his work in Congress and renowned think tanks. Robert Wexler was born in Queens, New York, but spent his youth growing up in South Florida. He received his degree in political science from the University of Florida, but went on to George Washington for law school. After 5 years in private legal practice, Wexler began his illustrious career in politics. He served as a Democratic member of Congress for 7 terms, representing Florida's 19th district in the U.S. House of Representatives. During his tenure in Congress, Wexler signed a petition to impeach former President Bush, met with numerous Middle Eastern leaders, and served as an advisor to President Obama on Israeli issues. Robert Wexler unexpectedly resigned from office last year, but is now the president of the S. Daniel Abrahams Center for Middle East Peace. Wexler has been named one of the 50 most effective legislators in Congress by the Congressional Quarterly, was named on the Forward 50 list as one of the most influential leaders in the American Jewish community. Today, the highly accomplished Robert Wexler will join us to discuss his time in office, the current state of affairs in the Middle East, and the work being accomplished by his think tank. Mr. Wexler, I just want to begin saying what an honor it is to have you here today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Of course. So I understand that in June of 2008, you co-sponsored the articles of impeachment against former President Bush. What was your rationale into signing on to these articles since he was going to be ending his term in only 6 months?
Well, I thought it was, at that time, important to begin to create a record so that the imperial presidency that existed to a degree under the Bush administration would not in the future be viewed as something that is automatic and accepted. I understood there wasn't in fact going to be impeachment hearings at the end of a president's second term, but I also think that there was a constitutional precedent in effect that was created by President Bush, that it was important that there be some record within the House of Representatives of some people standing up and saying, you know what, I don't think this is what the framers of the Constitution intended in terms of the imperial powers of a president.
So how do you feel about Bush's recent comment in his memoir, Decision Point, stating he strongly approves the use of waterboarding? He's been kind of under the radar for 2 years, but...
Well, I think any president, President Bush included, has to make some very difficult decisions in terms of the security of the country. Particularly in light of 9/11 and the legitimate hysteria and concern that existed in our country as a result of that fanatical act, the president has to take at times extreme actions to protect the American people. So carte blanche, I don't think it's fair to just criticize President Bush for making decisions like that. You and I were not party to the CIA and the different briefings that he received. So while I, at times, and still do, wonder whether President Bush made the correct decisions, I'm cautious about criticizing the president when they're under such extreme circumstances as was the case after 9/11.
Yeah, I believe that is also a rational decision. So what was your motivation behind making multiple appearances on the Colbert Report? Do you believe that social media and political satire is the new way of reaching your constituency?
Well, I don't know if it's the new way, but clearly people like Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert have a tremendous impact on people, particularly younger people. And what I learned, I was not aware, but in order to be a Stephen Colbert fan or a Jon Stewart fan, you have to be a highly educated, highly informed viewer. Otherwise, you won't find what they do funny. And I happen to think both of those gentlemen are remarkably talented. They are incredibly gifted in terms of their intellect and their wit. And so I thought it was a fun thing to do, to participate in that everyone understood it was the comedy station or the Comedy Central station. And I didn't, at that time, fully appreciate that some people might take advantage of things that are said on a comedy station.
Right. So we have to go to a quick commercial break. Don't go anywhere. More insights with Robert Wexler when we return. Welcome back to an ATV Special Broadcast. Joining us is Congressman Robert Wexler. So, in one of your previous blog posts, you said that you would only support Obama if you were completely convinced of his commitment to supporting Israel. Do you feel that Obama has done enough in supporting Israel in his first 2 years of presidency?
I do. In fact, I think the president himself, along with Secretary of State Clinton and the entire Obama administration, has provided more security cooperation between the United States and Israel than arguably ever before. Whether it's participating with Israel in the development of necessary weapons to protect Israel from oncoming or incoming missile fire, to joint exercises between the United States and Israel, to the extent of the United States vetoing obnoxious resolutions after resolutions in the United Nations, to continuing to fund assistance to Israeli military and security needs, the Obama administration, I think, has gotten a grade A. So I'm proud to have supported President Obama during the campaign, and more importantly, his record in terms of seeking to achieve a lasting, just, permanent peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians should be supported by all people who care deeply about the security and the sanctity of the State of Israel.
So how do you feel about Israel's recent announcement to build new housing in East Jerusalem? Some believe this is an act of provocation.
I think President Obama today in Indonesia said it was unhelpful, and it is. It's unhelpful when either side makes an act that is a provocation or makes it more difficult to get back to negotiations. It is long-standing American policy that we do not support building beyond the lines that in effect are recognized as Israel's borders by the United States in terms of the 1967 lines. And there are building beyond that line that is somewhat provocative from the Palestinian perspective, and there's other building that is even more provocative. The point is, the most important point, is that Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Abbas, in my humble opinion, need to get back to the negotiation table. There needs to be a serious discussion on issues such as borders, territory, creating those borders both for Israel and the Palestinians, addressing the right of return, making certain that we're creating one Jewish Israeli state and one Palestinian state, and getting on with the business of resolving the Israeli-Palestinian, Israeli-Arab conflict.
So, moving on to your term in Congress, you resigned from Congress last October. Why didn't you decide to complete your final year?
I made a decision. It was a personal decision to take a position as the president of the Abraham Center for Middle East Peace. And the American-Israeli relationship for me is something that is both professionally, politically, and personally a very important part of my life. And I had served in public office for 19 years between the United States Congress and the Florida State Senate. And I thought this was a unique opportunity to do something I loved and was passionate about and could make, I hope, a bit of a difference. We work with the Israelis, the Palestinians, the American government, trying to, sometimes what they call track two diplomacy, not government to government, but other people taking different initiatives and roles to try to bridge the gaps between the parties. And Lord knows the very able American officials, as well as the Israelis and the Palestinians, can use some help sometimes. And it's a decision I made, and I'm very happy about it.
That's great. So you've turned to working at a think tank. But since you left Congress, Republicans have taken control of the House. How do you feel that this shift in power will affect the Arab-Israeli conflict from a congressional standpoint?
Well, I'm very close friends and have great respect for some of the Republicans that will take over the reins of the foreign policy committees. For instance, Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen is a extremely capable member of Congress. She is a strong supporter of the American-Israeli relationship. And American policy towards Israel and the region has always been bipartisan. And I hope and expect that it will continue that way. Will there be times where there might be added pressure or tension between the president and a Republican-held House of Representatives? Of course there will. But I find most Republicans, most Democrats, almost all, when it comes to the foreign policy of the United States, are Americans first, Republicans or Democrats second. And foreign policy does often stop at the water's edge. And I think with respect to this conflict, America's national security interests are so significant that I'm hopeful, I hope it's not wishful thinking, but hopeful that partisanship will be left for the tax debate and the variety of economic debates, and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict I'm hoping we can address as one unified voice.
So we have to take a quick commercial break, but don't go anywhere. More insights with Robert Wexler when we return. Welcome back to an ATV Special Broadcast. Joining us is Congressman Robert Wexler. Turning to your current job, what is the Center of Middle East Peace currently working on to help bring a comprehensive peace to the region?
Well, I think the most important thing that we do is for instance, a week ago we were in the region. We met with Prime Minister Netanyahu, we met with President Abbas. We went back and forth from Jerusalem to Ramallah, talking about different ways to resolve the differences between the Israeli position and the Palestinian position with respect to security arrangements that would need to take effect and be implemented should there be an agreement between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I think we were able, because of our relationships and trust with both sides, to develop a closer understanding. Now, of course, it's up to the American government and the Israelis and the Palestinians to make decisions for themselves. But I think that's an example of a positive role that we can play. I think there are different things we and other interested parties in Washington and elsewhere can do. For instance, with respect to the Arab Peace Initiative, an initiative that the King of Saudi Arabia essentially initiated almost 8 years ago with the King of Jordan, establishing for the first time that Arab nations were willing to normalize their relations with the State of Israel if Israel were to withdraw from the so-called occupied territories. The Arab Peace Initiative needs to be fleshed out, particularly the security arrangements that the Arab governments would provide to both the Israelis and the Palestinians, and groups like the Center for Middle East Peace can help flesh out those kinds of details.
So do those leaders in the Middle East come to you for help for these kind of things, or do you guys do your own research and go to the Middle East and provide this research you've done?
Both. I mean, you develop a reputation, partly because of trust, partly because people hopefully think you're objective enough. You all start with our own biases. We need to understand that. I am deeply committed to the security of the State of Israel and to the unbreakable bond that exists between the United States and Israel. But sometimes that's actually an asset for the Palestinians, an asset for the Arab nations, because they understand that nothing good is going to happen in discussions unless the Israelis feel comfortable, whether the Israelis feel secure. So it's important for friends of Israel, Americans in particular, to provide or help provide the security environment in which the Israeli Prime Minister feels comfortable talking about borders, the right of return, the future of Jerusalem, and things of that nature.
So when do you realistically foresee an end to the Arab-Israeli conflict?
Well, I don't think anyone has quite the answer, but I think it's something that is more achievable than people may believe, and even at a time where there's a tremendous obstacle, such as the settlements and the settlement freeze and the Palestinian demand that the Israelis implement a second settlement freeze. Even at these times where there seems to be a knocking of heads, I'm confident that it is so much in the interest of both the Palestinians and the Israelis to negotiate and to end this conflict relatively soon that reason will prevail. Whether it's 2 years or 4 years, who knows? It'll be implemented over a significant period of time, no doubt. But the end result is clear. We need 2 states for 2 people. The Jewish state of Israel, a democratic state within internationally recognized borders that I believe can, within those borders, consist of almost 80% of the so-called settlements, and at the same time a cohesive, economically viable Palestinian state that delivers dignity to the Palestinian people, which is long coming.
So you were the only member of the House of Representatives who was able to witness the signing of a peace agreement. Why do you feel like these continuous peace agreements that have been put on the table have been betrayed or fallen apart?
President Clinton was kind enough to invite me to the signing of the Wye River Peace Accord. This is a very difficult set of problems that exist between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And for those who have been to the region, I mean, this isn't an area where the Israelis live 500 miles this way and the Palestinians are 600 miles this way. They are interconnected, town and town. One little road will separate them. So there's been progress, significant progress. The good news is that the Israeli economy is thriving. It's good news because the Palestinian economy now is thriving as well in the West Bank. I was in Ramallah just recently. You wouldn't recognize Ramallah if you were there 8 years ago or even 6 years ago. Prime Minister Fayyad has implemented a state institution building plan, which is, I would respectfully suggest, the most responsible economic plan that any Palestinian leader has ever put forward. So the combination of President Abbas and Prime Minister Fayyad is arguably the finest group of leaders that the Palestinians have had to choose from in a very long time. And I believe Prime Minister Netanyahu is the kind of strong leader that can actually deliver peace in Israel. So while there's enormous problems, there's also very significant opportunities, and Americans and all of us who care need to continue to prod the parties towards discussion and amicably working this out.
Thank you so much for helping
My
giving
pleasure.
us hope for the Arab-Israeli conflict. That's all the time for we have tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Wexler. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.